participated in a special meeting for expulsions and 3 closed sessions. We will now call the public portion of our day to order, beginning with our workshops. Mrs. Bass, will you please call the roll?
District 1, Barbara McQuinn. Here. District 2, Chuck Shaw.
Here.
District 3, Karen Brill. Here. District 4, Erica Whitfield.
Here.
District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews.
Here.
District 7, Deborah Robinson.
Here.
Board members, I need a motion to approve Mrs. Whitfield joining us telephonically, or whatever that is called. Motion by Mrs. Andrews, second by Dr. Robinson. Any discussion? All in favor, opposed, motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Still joining us on our dais is Superintendent Dr. Donald Fenoy, General Counsel Sean Bernard, and Board Clerk Carol Bass. Senior staff members will join us periodically as directed by the Superintendent, and I see our Inspector General is also with us today, Teresa Michael. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so remember to speak at a reasonable pace. Everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Superintendent Dr. Fenoy.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome our public speakers who are joining us in person today. While your attendance here at the board office is appreciated, please be mindful of important safety protocols that the district now has in place to conform with COVID-19 safety guidelines. Please respect this cautionary warning that in the event of interference with the orderly processes of the meeting, failure to follow the safety protocols and procedures or otherwise disruptive conduct, this conduct will result in removal of the person from the meeting. Please abide by these protocols so Palm Beach County school police officers do not have to take action. Mr. Superintendent, workshops.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'll turn it over to the Chief of Staff, Mr. Ed Tierney, for our 2021 Legislative Platform Development.
Chairman Barbieri, Vice Chair Mr. Shaw, School Board members, Dr. Fenoy. I'm pleased today to have the opportunity to help facilitate the board workshop on the legislative platform development. Before doing introductions, I'd just like to point out to the board the extremely high quality of work of all the individuals on this team and the sense of synergy, teamwork, and constant communication for the sole purpose of putting our district and our community in as advantageous a position as possible. This really is an outstanding team, and I feel privileged to be a part of it. So with that, I'll introduce seated with me our own Ms. Kathy Villavicencio, remoting in our federal lobbyist, Ms. Rita Solnet, remoting in from Capital City Consulting, Ms. Megan Fay, and Mr. Ron LaFace. We'll have 1 hour for this public discussion. That hour will certainly go quickly, so I would caution us to be mindful of time allocation. This conversation will ultimately inform the development of not only our legislative platform, but also the development of our items of continuing concern that the Chief of Staff's office will be putting together in the next couple of weeks and then disseminating to the board. So our goals today are to review the platform development timeline, discuss the legislative landscape, save an abundance of time for the board discussion on legislative priorities, and then share next steps. This time I'll turn it over to Ms. Villavicencio.
Hello, good afternoon. We have our slide presentation up over here, but I don't think it's advancing on the larger screens. So I don't know if we can kind of fix that first so that the board members can see that. And while that's working, we're on slide 3 right now, so I know everybody has that on board docs. But as Mr. Tierney shared, we have a few eventful months in front of us as we try to put our legislative priorities out, not only on a state level, thank you so much, not only on a state level, but also this year on a federal level. Thank you, sir. So that's kind of new this year, but I think given the sense of urgency around COVID and how funding is kind of informed at the federal level, we realize that that's kind of a new priority for us as a district. So very excited today to have not only Megan and Ron on the line, but Rita as well to talk through a little bit about that. So today we're talking through just what our priorities are, having this public discussion of what y'all feel as a board should be things that we are definitely advocating for at the state and federal level. After today's conversation, we'll work with district leadership as well as notes from this meeting to draft some platform documents for you to review. And if there are separate priorities that you'd like to put forward to FSBA, just a quick reminder that those are due by October 15th. And so we clarified with FSBA, as board members, y'all are able to do that individually. So if there are priorities that you feel very strongly about, you can submit those to FSBA and let them know you'd like them to take them under consideration for FSBA's larger platform. So again, that deadline is October 15th. And then we hope to come back to you on November 17th to just get the board's approval, similar to last year, for those state and federal level platforms, as well as issues of continuing concern, so that we can go ahead and work with Ron, Megan, and Rita to put our advocacy strategy together. And I think it's important to always just have that additional context in terms of what we're working towards. So our state session is scheduled for March 2nd to April 30th of 2021. I know that seems like a long time from now, but the quicker we have these priorities in place, the sooner we can put our advocacy strategy together and make sure that we are putting those priorities forward to our lawmakers so that they understand what we need as a school district in the age of COVID and beyond, right, our long-term game. In terms of other dates that we've typically worked towards, our joint meeting with the county commission, committee weeks where a lot of the lawmakers are already, putting forth bills and things like that even before the session, and our favorite Palm Beach County Day at the state capitol. A lot of those dates haven't been determined yet. So at the state level, especially, they're still trying to figure out what their new normal is. Will they have these larger gatherings on the Hill? Will advocacy look different? So some of those are still in flux. I am definitely in contact with Ms. Vicki Nolan, the director of the delegation, as well as Ms. Rebecca De La Rosa at the county, so that as soon as those dates come about, we can communicate those to you, but just want to let you know those still have not been set. And then again, you've heard Mr. Burke talk about this many times. We don't know what's going to happen with the current fiscal year budget, just given everything that's happening with COVID and the economy. So that's something that we are, definitely concerned about. And before I turn it over to Ron, Megan, and Rita, they're just going to give us a little bit more information on the 2021 legislative landscape. They constantly have their ears to the ground on the state and federal level, so they can kind of help us frame the conversation that you'll have today around priorities that are informed by, the PDF that was on board docs, so we already have a good understanding of where we are, but really going to turn it over to them so they can just help guide us a little bit more in terms of what the context looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ron and Megan first so they can walk us through the state level, and then once they're done, they'll turn it over to Ms. Solnit so she can just talk a little bit about what's happening in DC. Ron, Megan?
Ron, your microphone is on mute.
All right. How is that?
Suspenseful. Thank you, Ron.
Yes. This is my first Google meeting, so I will hope to have it go better from here on out. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for letting Megan and I join you to give this 2021 kind of a landscape at the state level overview. I think it's important to really understand where the state may be for the 2021 session, to walk through what has happened since the COVID pandemic began. As you will recall, the COVID pandemic really started to move quickly right at the end of the legislative session. So unlike school districts and the work that you all have had to do since that time, meeting, adjusting budgets, adjusting the way that you deliver instruction, the legislature has really been able to sit back and somewhat observe, sorry, I just saw a little text that somebody was wanting to make sure that they were hearing me okay, to study the impact of what has happened up until this point. There have been some immediate changes from the legislature. In September, the Legislative Budget Commission met and they had to change their long-term forecast. They did meet virtually, which was an interesting concept for the legislature. They had never had to do that before. And we still don't know, as Kathy had mentioned, what it is going to look like when the legislature comes back into session and committee weeks after they do organize. Currently, the Capitol complex is closed to the public, so you're only allowed in if you actually work there. And as Kathy also mentioned, they have made no decisions on what they're going to do about legislative days on the Hill or any large gatherings that happen in Tallahassee and whether or not they're going to approve those, and they're going to take kind of a wait and see approach. Since there is a lot we don't know, let's talk a little bit about what we do know. COVID has absolutely negatively impacted the state's budget. Just to give you a little context, I know that everybody reads the papers and sees what's going on each month with the revenue collections. But in the second quarter alone in Florida, Florida's gross domestic product was down 4.5%. It was supposed to actually be projected as a 2.5% increase for that quarter. So that's actually a 7% loss of Florida's GDP in the second quarter. And tourism was also down 68%. Because of those and the lower revenue that the state has collected, we have reduced our revenue forecast for this current fiscal year that we're in by $3.4 billion. So we anticipate having $3.4 billion less than they had budgeted for. It's a 10% reduction. And for next year's fiscal year budget, we anticipate a $2 billion less in revenues, which is a 5.6% reduction of where they had thought they were going to be. So just from a way to look at how it's happened over the past few months, April, May, and June tax collections were all under the estimates, so we received much less than we anticipated we were receiving. Was somewhat of a break even. August actually exceeded its revenue estimates, but these were the revised estimates. So that it was actually $83 million less than what we had currently believed we would be getting for August. But once the state went in and revised the estimates, we actually came in over that. So what does that mean for us as a school district? I will say that based on where the sales tax collections are to date, we do not anticipate a special session for budget reductions. But I do want to be very clear about this, and I'm sure that Mr. Burke has mentioned it many times. That does not mean that we are out of the woods for this fiscal year by any means. The state has, as you know, held all school districts harmless for less students this fall. And we're still using last spring's pre-COVID student count, and that's what we're being funded on. But they have not made that same allowance yet for the spring. I do believe that the state would like to hold school districts harmless for the spring if they have less students than we had last spring. But the issue that the state is facing on that is that there's about 20 school districts that have growth. They have more students than were counted in the spring. A lot of them are rural districts, but there are some medium-sized districts. And Florida Virtual School has about 3 times as many students as it's currently being funded for. And so the state's kind of caught in this conundrum of, okay, well, how do we hold school districts harmless that are instructing less students when we also have to give school districts who have more students money, and that's, and should it be shifted around? So that is a continuing issue that we will work on, and just be assured that it is a top level issue here in the state, and everybody is looking at data of where these students are and trying to come up with a solution that gets us through this budget year. But moving on to the planning for the 2021 session, I do think that there's a couple of themes that you all should keep in mind. I believe the state is going to have to make budget reductions for the next fiscal year, for the 21-22 fiscal year. How much of the reductions they will need to make really is going to depend on a lot of different items, mainly where the state's recovery trajectory is going and how far we have recovered by then, whether or not there's any more federal aid, and whether or not the state is willing to adopt any new revenue streams. They are considering a few of them, and they're actually pretty big ticket items, mainly requiring the collection of online sales tax. Florida is one of the few states in the nation that still does not require collection of online sales tax, as well as negotiating with the Seminoles to institute a new Seminole gaming compact, because as of today and for the last year and a half, there is no compact between the state and the Seminole Indian tribe, and so the Seminole Indian tribe are paying no taxes to the state for the operation of their casinos. As I said, both of those items are very seriously already being considered, and they would add to the state revenue. But I will say that even if the state is able to figure out a way to hold school districts harmless from their student count reductions for this current year's spring term, I do not see any way that that continues into next year's fiscal year budget. So we will be impacted next year, depending on in two ways. One, if they do reduce K through 12 funding, and secondly, if we do actually lose students and they migrate out of the school district, then we would lose those FTE counts, because I do believe that they will, at the best case scenario, be recounting school districts for the 21-22 school year. In that light, last week, the State Board of Education passed a preliminary 21-22 budget recommendation. I will call it a continuation budget. They really are facing the same unknowns that everybody else is, and so they really just basically moved the current year budget into next year. They did fund student growth in their budget, but the count that they used was the pre-COVID count, so nobody really has total confidence in that count. They did add $10 over last year's budget to the base student allocation, but everything else in the budget is effectively just maintaining current year funding. That includes funding the Safe Schools allocation at the same level, funding the mental health allocation at the same level, and funding the new teacher salary increase categorical at the same level, $500 million, which they did last year. They make no changes to the required local effort and maintain the policy of just increasing property values by new construction, and they make no change to the DCD. So this proposed budget by the state board will be what the governor proposes to the legislature and will be the starting point for the legislature. I do want to note one item that I did not mention when I was talking about the state's revenue collections. All of those funds that I went over, with this year having a $3.4 billion reduction and next year having a $2 billion reduction, those are just in state revenues. So these forecasts do not take into account any of the Federal CARES Money Act that the state has received to date, which is approximately $5.8 billion. The reason that it's not in the forecast yet is because the state budget writers really do not know how it's been spent. It's all been spent by the executive branch and the governor on COVID recovery. So they are currently gathering information as to what has been spent where, and those one-time CARES funding dollars will be folded into these budget estimates as we get closer to the budget. So with that, I think it would be good to turn it over to Rita to give us a kind of a lay of the land on the federal level, if that's okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good? Okay, thanks. First of all, thanks for those kind words, Ed. I really appreciate it. And I am so sorry because I wanted to be there today, but I'm following protocol for quarantining. So I hope to see you all in the next meeting, live and in person. So I actually have two pieces of good news on the federal level before I go into why we have a legislative priority list for federal this year, and what's a little bit of what that is, just like more about the landscape, because we're all very conscious of the fact that we want you to spend the time talking about these issues. So these two things just recently happened, and I think it's important to talk about it. So number one, I know I've put them in my reports to you about the CARES Act with regards to private schools. So in March, if you recall, Congress appropriated $13 billion to K-12 schools to help school districts address the rising needs of the pandemic. Well, in the CARES Act dictated that money would flow as it did with Title I funding. A few weeks later, and that bill was passed, it was enacted. A few weeks later, the U.S. Department of Education published what they originally called a suggestion, then they called it an interim rule, ordering districts to distribute funds based upon the total enrollment in private schools. and not relating at all to financial need. So using that approach, the overall outcome would have been hundreds of millions, diverting hundreds of millions of dollars away from public school districts that were servicing low-income students and giving that money to, in many instances, wealthier private schools. So, in fact, the Council of Great City Schools, which is a great organization, they estimated that just its member districts alone would lose $292 million. And I think they only have like 30, maybe 34 member districts. So Council of Great City Schools, National School Board Association, I think even the National Superintendents Associations got together. There were some lawsuits around the country. In July, for instance, there was a lawsuit in California and they won it. In the state of Washington in August, there was a lawsuit and they won it. And 2 weeks ago, there was a lawsuit in the state of Maryland and they won that. And the significance of that was for the entire United States. So I didn't jump up and down too much at that point in time because it was 2 weeks ago. And in addition to the ruling, the judge gave the U.S. Department of Education 30 days to file an appeal if they wanted. So the good news is that on Monday, Secretary DeVos said they're not going to file any more appeals. And so we can go back to the original, what's in the bill, the title, to follow the Title I funding. So I think Mike Burke is going to be really happy about that. The other piece of federal funding that I thought was really important to talk about. You may have seen this. I know I've written a lot about it, but I really am so happy to have the opportunity to actually talk to you about this because it can get complicated. But that is the coronavirus, the 5th Coronavirus Relief Act. So let me just give you a brief summary. In May, the U.S. House of Representatives prepared a bill. They called it the HEROES Act, and they passed it. That was worth $3 trillion of stimulus funds. They threw it over the transom to the Senate, and it was dead on arrival. Senate didn't do anything with it. 60 days later, Mitch McConnell came up with a Senate bill similar to this, and he called it the HEALS Act. And that was $1 trillion. That also never got to the floor for a vote. So they went on summer break, they came back, and then Mitch McConnell produced something called the Skinny HEALS Act, which you might have heard about. That one was $500 billion. So remember now, we went from 3 trillion to 1.1 trillion, now down to 500 billion. So just yesterday, Steve Mnuchin, who is the Treasury Secretary representing the White House, got together with Nancy Pelosi, and they have come to an agreement, it looks like, on the HEROES Act 2.0 is what they're calling it. So I'm very excited about this because the amount of money for education in the HEROES Act 2.0 is considerably more than any of the previous bills. It's $175 billion is allocated to K-12 Education Stabilization Fund. It's a 2,000-page bill, first of all, but they have additional funding to offset the shortfall of federal reimbursements for school meals, which I know was really important to us. They have something that wasn't in any of the other bills, which was really kind of neat, and I think our district would be interested in it. It was $5 billion for emergency school facility grants to improve ventilation systems. And then, of course, they had $12 billion for broadband, $3 billion for home connectivity. So we don't know. First, I do know this. Everybody is telling me that the White House really wants to pass some form of a stimulus bill. So they're motivated to do it. Now, whether or not that jumpstarts negotiations in the Senate, I don't know. And what's also kind of muddying this up is, unfortunately, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They're going to be spending a lot of time, and their focus is going to be on a replacement for her in hearings. So I have been told, though, that even if this doesn't pass before November 3rd, something is going to be done probably before the end of the year. So there's hope on the horizon. So Ed and Kathleen and I felt it was important to have a federal priorities list this year. So there's been a trend in the past 4 or 5 years, maybe, kind of a shift in the need for boots on the ground lobbying at the federal level. And when you really look at it, in most, and I think Kathy alluded to it in the beginning, in most cases, it's been a crisis that has been driving the need for lobbying. We've had, floodings and fires, school shootings, hurricanes, and now this year a pandemic. So acquiring the federal funds and getting it to precisely where it needs to be is really critical at this point, and it's always situational dependent. One example of that was, I think it was last year, that the west coast of Florida had a lot of damage due to a hurricane. I think there were 2 schools that were decimated, and they kind of exhausted all their efforts. They went to FEMA, they were turning to the state for help, but their lobbyist at the time also was aware that the U.S. Department of Education had a bucket of money for disaster relief as well. So they were able to get some assistance there. And another trend, the other reason is another trend at the federal level is that some of these agencies have begun to allocate funds directly to the school district level versus to the state level. And one example is the U.S. Department of Justice. After Parkland, for instance, they set up funds for school resource officers and for training for them. That went directly, directly to the school districts. Another one that I came across was the Department of Homeland Security set up funds, for instance, for cybersecurity issues, again, going directly to school districts. So, so the trend is to get dollars to where they're needed instead of this fire hose, type approach. And so for those reasons, we felt it was important to compile a list of federal legislative priorities. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're actually, the federal ones are a little bit simpler to follow because there's not so many formulas that goes on at the state level. It's not that complicated. But one is definitely to support any and all efforts to pass up the 5th coronavirus stimulus bill. Again, right now it's being called HEROES Act 2.0. I don't know what it'll be called next week, but we want to make sure that passes. Another one is to simply support an increase in the federal investment in the IDEA program to its original 40%. What that means is when that program came out, we were supposed to be reimbursed up to 40% of the cost needed to meet special education mandates. And they're hovering anywhere between 11% and 14%. What else did we have here? Oppose the creation of new programs that may divert funds from high need schools. Specifically what that means is to any private school voucher program that lacks maybe the academic and financial accountability that traditional public schools are governed. Another big one was support any bills that would increase mental health services. That included psychologists, agencies, training, and support flexible funding for technology. Another one is to continue to ensure that funds are available to support the cost of student meals. This is critical this year because of the economy. And so we want to make sure that we have, our eye on this as far as, making sure that these kids are fed and making sure that we can get the money for that. So with that, there's one more I want to mention that's not on there. And that is support the return of the J-1 visa program for cultural exchange. We've been working with the Palm Beach County Hispanic Education Coalition, and this J-1 visa program, which was stopped by the administration back in June for reasons of the pandemic, and also for reasons of the economy, it sunsets in the end of the year, December 31st. So we want to keep our eye on that because Palm Beach County happens to use the J-1 visa program to bring in teachers to teach English as a second language. So I want to make sure that I mention that for our friends at the Palm Beach County Hispanic Education Coalition. So that's it. Kathy?
All right, so Ed, this is kind of the meat and potatoes section now. We have about half an hour to kind of, for the board to discuss what their priorities are. So I'm going to let Ed walk us through a suggested format for that. And if they can just put the slides back up, that would be great. Back to the presentation, that would be great.
So at this point, I'll call the board's attention to the PDF.
Mark, I think we need our unmuting now.
At this point, I'll call the board's attention to the PDF document attached to this agenda item. That's a 4-page document. 2 of those pages are individual.
Everyone in the room, we can't hear. Thank you, Mark.
You hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Two
Thank you.
2 of those pages are individual board member priorities, evidenced by conversations with Ms. Solnet. 2 of those pages are district staff priorities. Ultimately, this will be synthesized into both the main platform and the items of continuing concern. So the next slide are themes that we thought would help guide board discussion. At this time, Mr. Board Chair, I'll turn it over to you for board discussion with the reminder that the lobbyists are here to either help facilitate that discussion or certainly answer any questions.
All right, board members, you want to start down there with you, Mrs. McQuinn? No? Ms. Brill?
So I don't know if we're going to follow the order on this, but if I can, I do have a question. And, for me, I was thinking we were going to follow like the sort of the setup from last year, but last year's priority, the first one had to do with concordance scores. So for staff, I need to know, did the use of concordance scores to meet assessment graduation requirements sunset as expected July 1st?
Someone on the academic team can answer that question.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Microphone.
Test.
Got it.
You're good.
It did not sunset, so it's still in effect. We did put it on there to try to have it. So it's still in effect for the current sophomores would get the new concordance scores. So we were asking it to be put on the legislative platform to have it delayed for implementation.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding you, but you're saying it did not sunset, and so we're
So
going
it's still in effect for
for this school year?
this current sophomores. No, it'll take effect for the current sophomores. So the seniors and juniors, it would not affect right now. You're talking about the new concordance scores
Okay.
that are being phased in.
Well, no, I'm talking about the use of concordance scores that we had on there last year to be able to use the PERT, the ACT, and the SAT in order for the students to meet graduation requirements.
So for this year's senior, no. So what happened for last year's seniors is not in effect for this year's seniors. So they will need to meet all graduation requirements, including accordance score if they don't pass the FSA for ELA or Algebra 1 ELC. They could then...
For this year's seniors.
For this year's seniors.
So that we discussed last year, is going to have a really harsh effect on ESE students because there's really going to be no path for them to get a standard diploma. So, okay, so I don't know, how do we want to proceed with this? Do you want me to talk about academics?
The Chief of Staff is played it out there. The suggestion is that we go through the priorities that we find, to be the most important to us, so we can get some agreement on adding those to the list that we'll all accept.
So each of us individually just say so do you want me to continue?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so when I looked at the chart that we were provided with under academics, it said use of national norm test to gauge student achievement. I don't know if that was supposed to be this with the concordance scores, but I'd like to see us make sure that we have something in there, whether it's last year's priority or something about using a norm reference test as an alternate path for students to be able to get a standard diploma.
Responding to I'm the one who put that there. I will do it every single year. Remember that I'm always asking that we not use FSA. So I'm in total agreement about the request to go ahead and delay the sunsetting of the concordant. But the piece for me is, I would love for someone to just find how much it costs to do the FSA, starting at the state level all the way to the school district. That would be huge. But I think using a nationally normed test like the SAT, I'm not talking about the college-bound SAT, it just makes sense. Frankly, I'm not interested in how a student scores on a state of Florida test. I want to know how a student scores on a national level, and you can get all that breakdown, like schools, et cetera. So first of all, it seems financially ridiculous to do a Florida test, and I just don't think it gives us the information that we need to have. But that was my...
Okay, so that would be, you could put that on the list, because they're two separate things, the concordance scores and the norm referenced. And then I also still wanted to have the scheduling flexibility so that school boards can determine the number of instructional hours, for each semester, especially now as we're in these different types of learning environments. And I don't have a whole lot that were at the top because I figured you didn't want a laundry list from all of us. But I did have a very strong desire for us to have something in our package allowing LEAs to make decisions during emergencies without, you can't say without interference from the governor or the commissioner, but I think we need something in there because of what we went through with opening up schools. So I think that's like my number one priority, is to allow school districts to make decisions for school districts, and when there's an emergency or whatever situation there is, we don't need to have our authority usurped. And I think that has to be a real hot priority.
Hold on 1 minute, Ms. Brill. So Mr. Tierney, so if each board member is going to give you their own list, would you like us to see if we all agree with something that one of the board members has so we can add it to the list as one of the ones we all agree on, or you want us just to go? I can just see us every one of us having 5 or 6 different priorities, and now you've got 18, 20.
Yeah, I think people chiming in support, like Ms. McQuinn did with Ms. Brills, then we'll tick off 2 board members, and that will indicate when we start seeing larger numbers to move that up. So I think that's wise.
So the other one, you want to weigh in on those 2 so far? Ms. McQuinn already weighed in on the on using a nationally normed test. We all in agreement on that?
Mr. Barbieri, can I speak?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I just was thinking that since we have both Mr. LaFace and Ms. Fay here, we could get some of their opinions on what priorities that are on this list that we could have the biggest impact on. I'm concerned, this list is very long with a lot of very interesting things on here that I would like to see. But some things I imagine the state is already sort of planning on, and then other things I imagine we would really need to push some of our legislative effort into that to really make any kind of an impact. And I'd be very interested to hear their opinions.
Can I comment on that?
Go ahead.
I think that we should wait till the end, because I only have like 2 more. I think we need to hear the board's priorities, and then we could get their opinions on that. But like if they say you're not going to be able to get home rules, during emergencies, well, I don't care. I'm still going for it because we can't be in the same position we were this year. So can I just finish my other 2?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Brill.
Okay, so the only other 2 that really jumped out at me was the raising salary for veteran teachers. There's a couple of related items to that here. However you want to word it, we've got to do something to right that wrong. And then, I should be quiet and let you all agree, right?
Yeah, definitely. That was on my list. I mean, we get how many emails have we gotten from the veteran teachers saying that we forgot them, which really isn't actually true. It's that the state remembered only the new teachers and didn't give us any additional funding for the veterans. So we need to ask for that so we can try and get rid of this compression where a 12-year teacher is making the same thing as a first-year teacher. So we need to fix that. Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
Yes, so conceptually, I agree in terms of paying the veteran teachers more, but the way some of these recommendations are worded on how to do it, I disagree with, right? And so, like when it says, use the school grade A money to provide incentives to veteran teachers, I think the school already, well, it says that was eliminated anyway, but, so I just don't want to get into the how. I'm gonna find some other examples in here. I know that was kind of a recurrent theme in the board members' recommendations. I just don't want to, I don't want us to, the word micromanage comes to mind, but that's not exactly on point. I think we just say, we think the legislature should allocate money for veteran teachers, period, instead of getting into the hows that then cause some issues.
Yeah, maybe Ron and Megan would be able to help us help them in Tallahassee figure out how they do that once we give them that priority. Ms. Brill?
And then my last one was going to be and I'm sure other people said this, finding ways to get adequate funds for PPE, for, the teachers, bus drivers, staff, all of the COVID-related pieces. Even though we're going to be struggling with finances at the state level, we have to make sure that we get funding, whether it's federal or state or both. And that was it for me.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And I still want us to keep in mind VPK. I mean, if we don't start with our little ones, to put that money in a pot for them so that we can get better pay for those teachers and more money and funding for them. So that was one that I continually feel that we have to work on.
Other board members agree with the VPK funding? Dr. Robinson?
So I would like to change that to say they need to fund VPK to be full day. And then they can pay the VPK teachers as full day. They'll make more money. But children, they don't need to do that like 3.5 hours or 4 hours, whatever it is. They need to fund it. And that's always been the problem since day one with VPK. So we could put it on the table that it should be funded as full day.
Mrs. Andrews, continue.
Yeah, another one is the dual enrollment fees. We really want to make sure that we eliminate the requirement that school district must pay this tuition. When you look at our wonderful children actually going to the state colleges and universities for dual enrollment, that's a big deal. So we definitely want to make sure that's something that stays on the table.
Dr. Robinson?
So I have notes scribbled all over my document. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding something. So I know the schools get additional monies for AP IBAs, right? Do they get additional monies for dual enrollment?
No.
No. So there's a disparity in these accelerated courses that we, quote, make money on AP, IB, and ACE, and we spend money on dual enrollment.
Correct.
Okay, so just for my edification down the road, can we get some analysis on the relative benefits of academically for students to do dual enrollment versus AP, IB, ACE? Because I don't know who we would ask to pay it. If it was taken off the table, then it would come out of the parents' pocket, I'm afraid. And if that's the answer, then I'm not going to support it, because then I think we add to disparities. If we say dual enrollment, yeah, you can go, if you're a high flyer, you can go, but your parents need to pay it, I'm not going to support that. And so I kind of need answers before I can agree with Mrs. Andrews.
Well, let's keep it out there. And another one I want to say is we're trying to gather money for technology, and I know we don't have all the technology right now for one-on-one. We're following that. I looked at the calendar where we're going to be getting some more computers within the next month or so that we can be one-on-one. But this is going to be something that we're going to need for a long time. So there needs to be a piece for technology as we look at this pandemic right now and how we do business. Technology is a big deal. And what we've ordered now, those things will last just so long. So we need to get funding for technology. So I really want to make sure we don't leave that piece out. And certainly the funding for teachers. Right now, we're asking teachers to do so many things that they never had to do before. Certainly we want monies for our veteran teachers, but the way we look at how teachers are now having to teach simultaneously, having to do so many things that they've never done before, we've got to make sure that there should be a bucket of money somewhere so that our teachers will be able to get the support, the necessary support, and monies in place for them to be compensated and supported with professional development as well as finance to do the job that they need to do now. And it looks totally different from what they did just a year ago.
Any comments on Mrs. Andrews' priorities? So we all agree on the funding for technology. I'm sure we all, we're not quite at one-on-one, but as Mrs. Andrews said, those machines are going to wear out. They're going to have to be repaired, and they're going to have to be replaced. And we need a funding source to make sure we can continue replacing those as they come up. Mrs. Andrews?
And lastly, for our technical schools, as I've always said, Palm Beach County is behind as it relates to our technical schools. And so when we look at North Tech, we look at the training for the technical schools, West Tech, and all the rest of them. We need to put some real emphasis on what we're going to do to get these schools up and running so that we can have the necessary skills available for our children as they go to the next level. So we need to really make that an emphasis. We say it every year that we're going to do better, but we need to really do better when we look at Broward, Miami-Dade, and all these other districts like Orange. They're way ahead of us. So the technology piece with adult ed as well as the tech schools, we've got to get it done. And even with the technology for the technical schools and the adult ed, we don't have the technology for them. We need it for the students too, but for the adults, they're being left behind because we don't have the necessary equipment for them. So I'm talking about the technical schools, adult ed. The whole piece needs to be enhanced for the school district of Palm Beach County because we are behind many of the other districts.
Whitfield, do you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted a chance to talk on the priorities before we got off this section. But before I do that, let me just say a quick thank you to all of my colleagues for allowing me to call in. I did have my baby was a little sick today, and I wanted to make sure I followed all of the rules that we have put forward in our employee plans. So I'm trying to stay away just in case, which I really don't think I don't think she's bad. So just wanted to let you all know that. Thank you. So one of the things that I wanted to ask Ron and Megan about is some of the things that I'm finding, very important, obviously would apply to districts around the state. And so one of the things that we had on there was not to punish the children this year for not being able to accomplish, the same levels of scores that hopefully they would have gotten in a normal year. And so I'm wondering if that's something that we should put our effort behind. And then similarly, legislation to actually support some kind of recovery for our students post-pandemic, because so many of our students have been left behind. I know there's even some students who still haven't even logged in to be part of school this year. And so I really do worry about them. I want to just throw a really big thumbs up to the VPK and technology pieces. I think those are huge. And the veteran teachers, I really feel like we have to tell the state that this is untenable to have a 14-year compression in our funding for teachers. It's insane for us in Palm Beach County to expect teachers with 14 years of experience to be making the same amount of money as a brand new teacher. And I really think we need to put as much weight behind that as we can. And then finally, the PPE really worries me a lot. So I would love to ask the state to put an allocation. It's something that they've never had to think about in budget years past, but I very much think that we need that funding from the state level to really ensure that we can protect our staff and our students as much as possible. And the levels that we are funding at right now are unsustainable for us. So I want to make sure that we at least tell the state, if we're going forward in a pandemic and you want us to keep the schools open, we have to have more supplies and we need some funding to be able to make that possible. Thank you.
Ron, did you want to comment on that? That was directed at you and Megan.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Ms. Whitfield, all of those issues that you raised will definitely be issues that the state will be discussing and that we will be advocating on behalf of. Just to hit a couple of the notes that I made, a number of board members have mentioned the PPE. That is something that is going to be a hot topic, and a lot of it's going to depend on where the pandemic is at the time that we're writing the budget. Because the way that the state certainly looks at it is each district received a significant amount of money from the federal government for CARES, through the CARES Act, that was intended in a large portion to go to help clean the schools and put them in an environment where students could teach and not spread infection. But that's one-time money. I mean, that's not going to last. And so this is an item that we will keep at the forefront, but then work our arguments depending on what is happening with the pandemic at the time of the budget. If we still see a continued need for PPE that's going to require districts sustained funding, then we'll certainly have an easier road to make. I just wanted to kind of lay out that that's going to be somewhat of a timing issue. The achievement gap is something that I know that all of you all, as well as the district, is 100% focused on. When we worked with the state to get our reopening plan kind of looked at again when we moved into phase 2, the way that we rolled that out with the state was our number one focus was getting the students in the classroom who had not logged in, who we had not been able to find, and so we worked with Chancellor Hall and Chancellor Leva at the state, and certainly Dr. Fenoy to make sure that was number one priority, and the ESE children as well, and then rolling in all of the other students after that in that really quick opening that we had. But along those lines, we are working at the district level to identify where those gaps are. And that's going to be through progress monitoring as students are, folding back to the system and we're moving into the school year. And a lot of the data that we're going to develop to see what we need to do at the state is going to depend on what we're seeing in our district with our students. We certainly anticipate a wider achievement gap. I don't know how it's not there. We don't know what that actually looks like yet because the progress monitoring data is not in. Once we have collected that data, then we will formulate what we need as far as changes in state policy to help support those kids, close the achievement gap that's been widened because of the pandemic, and it will certainly be, I believe, a priority of the districts. Does that help answer some of the questions that you raised?
Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. And our children are learning quite differently, as we can see here in this boardroom with the computers as well as with the live meeting. And I'm worried because, the state has their guidelines grading our schools and testing. And we need to look at the possibility of making sure that wherever we are as it relates to assessment of our children and how well they're doing, that it's not something that's truly directed by the state. Every county is a lot different right now during this pandemic. We're going to be in this mode for a while. And so I'm just hoping that the conversation can be around, I don't know if we'll get a waiver. If we don't get a waiver, that the district can have local control as it relates to their schools and how well children are learning and how we get back on our feet. We're looking at October already. We'll be at December, Christmas, right around the corner. And you're talking about testing and all these things with children who are sitting on a computer with families not there, as well as people having to work. Their kids are trying to learn with a teacher trying to teach in the classroom. And so we know we're going to be losing a lot. So we've got to figure out how we take care of our children this year. And learning is totally different. Teaching is totally different as we look at where we are in this pandemic. And I know with the mental health piece, we got the money from the referendum, and the state gave us the money for the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. But as we continue through this crisis of this pandemic, mental health is a big piece. So we really need to figure out how we can get some additional monies so we can have more funding for mental health. So that was a lot of them, but I think all of them are important.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. I think my colleagues teed it up pretty well for me. So my first item on here is to not base third grade retention, grade level promotion, or graduation on this year's test scores. I've always hated mandatory third grade retention, but it will be worse this year if the state forces us to retain students based on tests on a single day. And we know what it looks like. I mean, those were nice words that were said by the lobbyists, but we know exactly what it looks like. We know exactly who will be retained. We know exactly who is going to suffer from this. You know, it's the same children who are seeing people get sick and die in their communities, right? And I've brought this up before, and I'm so glad to hear my colleagues saying similar things, because we have got to set aside somebody's money. Mr. Burke, you might not have it in your laptop right now, but I'm just telling you, we have to find some money and set it aside for the post-COVID academic remediation / acceleration. It is not going to be acceptable to see this additional crisis coming and then to wait and say, oh my, you know, but the budget's been cut and we can't do it. No. And let me be clear, because I don't want to like tap dance on the table later on. We know it's coming. We see it coming. And so we need to use every available means. In this conversation, we're talking about legislative action, whether it's on the state or federal level, but we need to ask for that money. And so waiving the test, the mandatory retention, and post-COVID acceleration money. And I would ask that if we can, maybe they will like it if we talk about partnership also with private sector, right? I don't see that we have the wherewithal, meaning flexibility and creativity to do things differently for children who need this academic remediation and acceleration. I do not want to flog them with the same stuff they've been getting during the school day. It's always been my issue. We need to make sure that we have room for creativity, let teachers and I'm gonna say and others support the children with creativity and help them engage and accelerate. So I'm just like crystal clear about this, so I'm really glad to hear the other comments. I guess I'll pause and see if you have consensus on that. So on the getting rid of the third grade mandatory retention and the set aside / find money for post pandemic academic, and it should say catch up, not clean up, but acceleration, academic acceleration for those we know we are leaving behind. We're trying to keep them safe. Health and safety first. I'm clear. I'm the one who's been saying it. I'm clear. But at the same time, we have to prepare for that crisis we see coming. So those are my two requests for now.
We all agree on those two? Yes.
Thank you. And then, so I'm gonna move on. I have a couple others. So we have the one that said teachers are essential workers. Can we explore a form of combat pay? And again, this is like not a new issue. I think the time is fine. I'm in my mind, I'm morphing that into differentiated pay. However, we can figure out how to do that. I think we need to do that. So I would support that. Did we get consensus from the board that we wanted full day VPK as one of our legislative issues?
Yes.
We did? Okay. All right, then I'll leave that alone. And then I think Mrs. Andrews mentioned this, but let me agree with the concept of a Palm Beach Tech, so that we have West Tech, we have North Tech being reimagined, and then we have South Tech as a charter school, but we also have a developing technical program at Village Center, formerly known as, community calls it Village Center. We call it Village Academy. And so I think that we have the opportunity to get it right, to create the model that's been long used in Broward, where high school students, not only who are there grades 9 through 12, the high school students from surrounding schools can come and take the technical courses as well as adults. And so I would like money to support those. So what I read here is about continued grants for West Tech's apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. No doubt about it, but I'd like to spend that into a bigger opportunity that would cover more of the county, if my colleagues would agree.
You got agreement? Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a question about, it says partner with Early Learning Coalition on a VPK request. I don't understand what that is on here, under state funding projects.
Mrs. Whitfield?
So I brought this up, I talked to our Early Learning Coalition and I suggested that we work together on legislative priorities around early childhood education, because I just feel like it would have a greater impact, since we were, I'm the representative for Early Learning Coalition and we were working on our legislative priorities too. So I think really it's to let them know what we're going for and make sure that we are in line with whatever they're working towards as well.
Can I follow up?
Go ahead, Dr. Ross.
So thank you. I think I have no problems with partnering with most anybody. I don't have a problem with partnering with Early Learning Coalition. But before we partner, I would like to know what they're talking about. I know that we did a couple years ago, we got money for I'm gonna just claim it, my Riviera Beach Pre-K Collaborative, and as a and that initiative actually was, the word authentic comes to mind. Like it was listening to the people who provide early childhood education and what their needs were. And it was a fantastic collaborative, and through that then there was the year that Riviera Beach was the only geographic area where their kindergarten readiness rates increased. And so Early Learning Coalition then suddenly became a great fan of these kind of partnerships, right? And I know that they have pushed to I think Ms. Whitfield has one in Delray and one in Lake Worth, and they tried to make me do one in West Palm. And I don't know if Ms. Andrews has one in the Glades, but the point is that work, that collaborative work has to be a groundswell. So I just don't want since we can't violate the sunshine, I just want to be clear, Mrs. Whitfield, don't let ELC drive that. The people who do the work must drive that, because otherwise it becomes another bureaucratic initiative. And so and I know ELC because I was on ELC, and they're one of the most bureaucratic of the bureaucracies, right? And so they do good work, but I'm just telling you, so I'm not going to, in my mind, give a blanket agreement to partner with them. Before I would want the school district's name attached to it, I need to see what their proposal is.
I think the idea was really just to have a discussion with them around what their legislative priorities were and what ours are. And then if they are going to request more funding for VPK, which full day funding, I think that's a great idea. It's obviously something that I've been really supportive of as well. I would just like to have us kind of in sync on those priorities that do align with both of our work. So it's not really about a specific funding request like your Riviera Beach Collaborative. It's more of, to me, a general decision that we would discuss any legislative priorities that were aligned between the two groups. So I have no intention of trying to just force something through. I just wanted to make sure that we worked together and had a discussion. So I think we're planning on having a meeting. Isn't that right, Ms. Solnat?
Yes, I was waiting for today's meeting before I called Warren Eldridge and got together with you, but yes.
Dr. Robbins?
Who's having a meeting?
Well, I think Ms. Solnit was going to set up a meeting with Mr. Elleridge just to talk about, their priorities and our priorities, and then we could bring that back to the board. It just hasn't been fleshed out in any way right now.
Okay, let's be quite clear. I'm not supporting it unless it comes back here, the specifics. I know the entity.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and Ms. Solnit, you've done a great job with this federal piece here because the money is so needed from the feds, and when we got the HEROES money, that was a big thing, but I'm happy to hear now that Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, they're all working together with this other, so follow that money, don't let it get by. But we were able to make it this year with the school food service funding. At one while, I was a little concerned because a lot of districts across the country had some cutbacks as it related to feeding and the food. And the agricultural department really kept us, and Mike Burke, you could probably talk a whole lot about that, kept us kind of in stay that we had the money for feeding. I think as long as we're in this mode of this pandemic, it's going to be a food issue for the children as well as families. And so we've got to follow the money with the agricultural department to make sure that there's no cuts in the school food service funding for these children that's going to need to be fed. So that's a big deal, and it was a little question mark in some places. We escaped, but it may not be for long, so we need to follow the money. Thank you.
Mr. Shaw?
Thank you. My item is a little more global and perspective. The issue of salaries, the veteran salaries for veteran teachers is important, but I think it's also critical that as the budget is created, and I think Ron and Megan have seen this for many years, that the money that was put in for teacher salaries is a committed fund source and not something that all of a sudden it just rolls into our basic student allocation for operations and that we're doing. It needs to be a steady, sustainable fund source for the funding.
Hold on a minute, Mr. Shaw. I think we all agree on that. Certainly the money that we raise their teacher salaries, they got to give us that money every year now because otherwise it falls back on us to come up with those tens of millions of dollars. Right, Mr. Burke?
And the same thing with the PPE issue. I think that we need to make sure that that's a sustainable fund source because in the event that this is carried over for a year or two, whatever the time period is, it's important that we have a sustainable fund source for that one. So I assume that that's pretty routine. The next one is some of the things that board members have talked about related to adult education and the career tech. There's been a lot of effort over the last about 2 years, and I know Mr. Bogus knows this one, is the issue of the courses for students getting high school credit for their CTE classes. And I would hope that if the opportunities arise again this year, that we continue the efforts on that. And I know Ron last year and Megan, there were some efforts that we did get some progress in that one. So I think that's one that doesn't have to be on our list as a top priority, but I think it's certainly something that needs to continue. In adult education, this may be a year to watch and see if there's ways that the costs related to GED and some of the performance measures that adult education has to meet, that there's a hold harmless for adult education because they're struggling this year on enrollment the same as K-12 is. So I think that's one that will be there. Obviously, and I think that you talked about the issue that the DCD is probably relatively safe this year, but I think we also need to keep on our list as a high priority the whole issue of the required local effort. The RLE needs to be something that we keep focused on statewide because it has such major implications. And the final one is to watch FRS and make sure that there's no raid on FRS issues, that if the state is needing money, it wouldn't be good that they start handing us additional costs on FRS. And then the other one is simply any of the issues related to home rule and ensuring that some of the things that we have, and some of the things in here that were listed are issues that if we have home rule and have that authority, they're things that won't go away.
Ms. McQuinn, did you have anything else? I know you had a couple comments at the beginning. All right, I know that district staff also has some things certainly that are important to us. Mr. Superintendent, I don't know if Mr. Burke or Judy want to address those.
I'll turn it back over to Mr. Tierney. He'll give directions from there.
I think Mr. Burke speaking to the hold harmless would be wise, if you don't mind, Mr. Burke.
Yes, so we've heard just as very recently from Commissioner Corcoran that it is their intent to hold districts harmless for the first semester. We have some questions about exactly how that will work. You know, is to hold harmless, at what level is that? Is that at Palm Beach County, which means that if students opted for the Florida Virtual School or a McKay Scholarship or a Family Empowerment Scholarship, you know, is that going to come out of our pot? Or will they still consider that being held harmless because those are Palm Beach County students? There's some intricacies with the charter schools. We have some charter schools that have gained enrollment, others have lost. You know, how's that hold harmless going to play out across our charter schools? So I'm part of a weekly call with Florida finance officers, and we've been asking some of these questions. And the DOE staff is still working on these issues, and we're waiting for that guidance. But, you know, to some extent, there's a little bit of devil in the details there with how that may affect us financially. Our enrollment right now is down about 7,500 students. So that's roughly, you know, figure $8,000 a student, that's close to $60 million. That's a significant chunk of FEFP funding at stake. And so the hold harmless becomes critical. If we're truly held harmless, you know, that for half the school year, that means that potentially, I guess, $30 million would be covered. And then, of course, we're hoping that hold harmless would be extended for the entire school year. The Finance Council has issued a letter to that effect to the commissioner with that request, and we're told it's being received fairly well, but we really don't know at this point how this is going to pan out. You know, regardless, we're going to have to start, as Mr. LaFace said, even if we are held harmless for this first semester or the school year, we have to start planning and reducing our staffing levels to get in line with our actual enrollment. So next Friday is a big day. It's October 9th. That's our the last day of the October FT survey window. It's date certain, and DOE is still asking that we submit that data, and they also still want us to meet class size reduction. And we're going to have to sit back and see what DOE does with that data and how they sort through it and how they implement this hold harmless. And I think Mr. LaFace did a nice job of explaining their challenges. It's hard to hold everyone harmless when you've got different players, and you've got the Florida Virtual School that's grown significantly, and these FES vouchers. So we're going to have to kind of sit back and see how this plays out and to what extent we're truly held harmless at the end of the day.
I think we all agree that Mr. Burke wants that, and we should put it on there. Certainly, it's important that we don't take a big hit in the second semester and try and figure out what we're going to do with the kids and the teachers. Not enough money to take care of all of it. So.
Yes, sir. This is a big issue across the state.
You have any others that you'd like to go over, Mr. Burke?
No, I think the board, I mean, I've been following along. I think your comments are right on. Mr. Shaw made a lot of excellent points of things that we learned from past recessions, you know, that we're to watch out for. So I think he did my job for me there. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. I just have some questions about some of the internal district staff priorities. So starting with the second Title I funding, increase the percentage of Title I funds districts may reserve at the district level to provide educational services to district schools in accordance with the approved Title I plan from 1% to 3% or greater. Can you just explain that to me? And then also, is that my pot for the post-COVID acceleration monies?
Help. You know, I had a couple Title I suggestions, and I need to maybe pull that up. Is that attached? Oh, Keith, could you speak to it, please? Thank you.
So that particular law change where what we could use at the district level for district level priorities was reduced to more dollars going right directly to the school. So yes, that could potentially be an opportunity to solve some initiatives at the central level to address the COVID slide or other district priorities.
And the downside would be there's 2% less money going to the schools?
Correct.
Okay. Well, like, part of me hates to support it, but I support it because I am so clear about this problem we're going to have on the other side of this pandemic. So I don't know, if there's consensus on that.
Mr. Shaw?
On that, the one thing that I didn't mention, and this takes care of third grade and some of that downside of that Dr. Robinson was talking about, maybe a legislative approach is for us to ask the state that any legislation related to student assessment and stuff be focused on setting the baseline for measurement of students back to prior COVID and so that we get a baseline that's where the kids left in March and not a baseline that would now have that normal traction of moving forward. So I think that may be a way to do that. If we create statewide a new baseline for the measurement of student achievement based upon all of the factors that just played, it probably would help us in dealing with the third grade issue and some of the others, as well as some of the credit issues that kids will have at the high school level, and may give us an opportunity on the Title I thing too.
Mrs. McQuinn, then Mrs. Whitfield.
I don't disagree at all either with the Title I increasing to 3%, except that we've made a commitment as a board that we are going to address across many areas, but our lower performing students. And so I would like to know that I love that schools wouldn't have to fund individual programs, et cetera, but I'd also like to know that there is some flexibility for schools to know that they can do what works at their school. Now, I'm sure we would do that, and I don't know what that looks like, but I know at some point I would like assurance that, I don't want to go into any specifics, but that schools have buy-in to that piece.
Yeah, if I may, just one example would be just a couple years ago, we started a district initiative with single school culture coordinators, and we were purchasing those centrally so that all Title I schools received one. In particular, schools with lower enrollment could not afford to fund one of those positions. They were year-round. They really helped the schools out. So when this law took effect, we had to really, schools who wanted to keep them, they would have to fund them out of their own budgets, and many of the schools could not afford to do that with the limited funds. The rest of the dollars that a school receives, the flexibility is there for them to purchase those items that they would like to purchase.
Okay. Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. Just a concern that I have around reducing funds to Title I schools. One of the things that I think that teachers or that principals have been doing during these last few weeks when we've had so many teachers teaching virtually is that one of the ways that they are able to cover within the Title I schools, those students who do show up in brick and mortar is because at a Title I school, they have more staff. Because they're able to like move people around as they need. My concern is that I know at schools that are not Title I, they don't have that same flexibility or ability to have additional staff members to assist in those really difficult situations that have come forward. So I'm a little concerned about kind of taking away those additional resources from our Title I schools. Am I not right in how that impact would be, or is that correct, that it would be impacted in that way?
The percentage is small enough that it doesn't have that kind of effect on an individual school's budget. So again, the smaller enrollments are the schools that get hit the hardest. Most of the schools, if they can afford it, do buy additional staff members. They would still be able to continue to do that. The 2% difference would not make that significant of a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
So did we land on that one? Did we land with a yes or no on that one? Okay. So then there's the one Title I funded one that says removing the language that requires districts to set Title I eligibility threshold no higher than the 2016-17 rates or the state's poverty average. And I support that. I do, because I think, as educators say to me, all Title I is not Title I, right? And so, in my opinion, we need to make sure that we have the most funds available for the schools that have concentrated poverty, right? Because that's what the issue is. Like, it's all kind of studies that show that now. And so I would fully support that as being part of our legislative platform.
Okay. Anybody else?
So does that mean it's yes? I don't kind of understand what we're doing. So yes, that's going in? Okay.
These are things that the district staff, the administration wants, so,
Ooh, don't say that in front of them. Okay. Okay, wait. I have another question. So the one on school capital half-cents surtax. So this is my only question. The voters approved that. So the legislators can change it?
Well, no, there's two related to referendums here.
Okay.
There's some, the different types of referendums have different eligible expenditures you can make. So the local government infrastructure surtax, which is what we're a part of, that actually allowed for school buses because it envisioned like county transit buses and that type of thing. But conversely, the half-penny sales tax that districts can do on their own for school capital outlay does not include school buses. So we would this is not an immediate issue for us, but somewhere down the road, we feel like it's one of those kind of cleanup issues that would make sense. So that if we ever need to go back to the voters on our own for a half penny, that we would have the ability to buy school buses. So like we had one in 2004, we had a half penny. All that money went really to construction, but we're just looking for more flexibility going forward.
Okay, so if I could restate, because I wasn't getting that at all. So we're not asking that the current sales tax money be able to be used for school buses. We're asking so that in the future, if there was a half-cent sales tax, that the law would allow us to use some of that money for school buses should the voters approve.
Correct.
Okay.
And we are currently buying buses with the proceeds from the penny sales tax that we're getting.
Vice Chairman Cho?
I think we're probably at a point where we've come up with a pretty good list, but I'd like to suggest that now, and I think we've done this in the past, that as staff works through this process of identifying what our priorities is, that we have maybe 4 items that are really global issues with all of these others that are part of it to be kind of subsections to it, so that it makes it easier for our lobbyists and meetings with legislators, so that it's really clear. We're not giving them 15 pages of ideas, but work through it, because some of these things that are on that list, and I think Ron would agree, maybe things that could be added as amendments and stuff. So Ron, can you react to that?
Yes, Mr. Barbieri, is that okay to speak?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we will work to kind of organize these thoughts. It's been extremely helpful hearing board member feedback on the individual items, even on the district items, and kind of in line with what we heard today, have a document that would be presented back, similar to how we've done in the past, but structured in a way that makes it workable for Megan and I up in Tallahassee during the legislative session to find opportunities, find coalition partners, as well as, work with the delegation to try to accomplish, what we can, whether that's in the budget or through changes in different pieces of legislation. There is certainly going to be, we've got, certainly a number of funding items, but we also have a number of academic items, starting, certainly with third grade promotion all the way through adult ed, that are going to be parts of substantive legislation, because the state is going to need to have some allowances for what happened when schools, went virtual in the spring and are rolling back in the fall. And so, we will be able to take the way that we present this to you once you finally adopt it and use it to try to achieve your goals. Does that help answer what you were asking, Mr. Shaw?
Thank you, Ron. I have a question, Mr. Oswald. I don't remember, did we push back the end of the school year when we pushed back the beginning of the school year, so we're farther into June?
Yes.
So shouldn't we ask the state, Ron, to help us with the statewide assessment schedule so that, because teachers are going to run out of time to teach, they're going to need more time because we're ending January, the end of January, so they're losing a whole month of, or almost a whole month of the time that they would normally have. So we need to push that back. I see that on the, I'm looking at this little tiny schedule, but it looks like the third grade ELA is in April, beginning of April. I mean, so the teachers basically have February and March, and now they're testing already, and there's still 2 months of school left after that. So we should probably take a look at that. Agreed, Mr. Oswald?
Yeah, I mean, third grade has always moved up earlier because of retention and then the writing portion. There was a statutory change where the rest of the testing begins after May 1st. I think Mr. LaFace can correct if I'm wrong, but I think it's after May 1st. So it was changed. If they can work on that to begin later, that would greatly help.
The assessment calendar is going to be up for discussion for this school year. We're still, frankly, the state's still waiting to see what the federal government is ultimately going to even require of states as far as statewide assessments, and then the assessment calendar based on when schools started late and how they're operating is going to be a point of discussion. And certainly on some of these, there's a very good case to be made that we need some more time.
All right, Mrs. Whitfield?
Sorry, I know you're ready to move on, but I just wanted to bring up one other item that was on the legislative priorities by the staff's office, chief of staff's office, was about the sovereign immunity caps. I feel like if ever there was a time to raise those limits, now is not the time. So I think we should really try to put that in our priority list as well, just because the amount we already pay out in legal issues is pretty high, and to lose additional funding, I think the general public thinks we have some special account where we keep all of our money for when people sue us, but it's the same account that teacher raises come out of, and the same account that student funding comes out of. So I really think now is not the time to be raising our sovereign immunity cap.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So what I'm understanding at this point is that all the recommendations coming from district staff will be going forward, like unless we object. That's kind of how we're operating that portion.
Yeah, they're going to bring us back. If you look at the next page, they were going to put together, that's something that Mr. Shaw referenced, they'll bring back to us, a list that we can take another look at to see what's on there and make a decision.
So, and I don't know how it would be packaged, because I hear a lot of things that to me are very important: the third grade retention, the post-COVID slide money, the issue of the concordant scores being delayed. To me, all those in my head are like accountability changes or testing reform or something. I don't know if we can package it like that, because I really don't want us to get nitpicky about which one of these one bullet points goes in as a priority, if I'm making sense. But I do want to lift up the issue about the concordant scores being delayed from internal staff's recommendations.
All right, any other comments from the board? Ms. McQuinn?
I just want to thank Capital City Consulting for the news, the news briefs that we're getting. They're great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ron, Megan, Rita. Thank you all for your help today. And you'll be working with district staff now to come up with a list for the board to take another look at to make sure we're all in agreement on what you're going to be fighting for us up there. Yes? Okay, thank you. Mr. Superintendent, you want to move on with the next workshop?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.